Chapter 1. The Garden Party. Interrupted the village of St. Mary Mead, basked in the mellow warmth of a late June afternoon, a golden light settling gently over the verdant lawns and hedgerows that framed its quaint cottages. The annual garden party at Rosamond Dalloway's cottage was well underway, a long-standing tradition that united the community in a rare harmony of laughter and leisure. It was an event marked on every calendar, and one the villagers prepared for with meticulous care. From the delicate sandwiches made by Mrs. Pritchard at the bakery, to the homemade jams proudly displayed by the ladies of the church. On this particular day, the air was thick with the scent of freshly mown grass, mingling with the sweet perfume of roses and honeysuckle climbing the white trellises that framed the garden paths. The low hum of bees busied themselves among the blossoms, while the soft rustling of leaves created a gentle undercurrent to the quiet conversations and occasional bursts of laughter. It was a scene of idyllic peace, a slice of English country life seemingly untouched by the troubles beyond its borders. Rosamond Dalloway, the hostess, was the very picture of gracious charm. A woman in her late 60s, she carried herself with an elegance honed by years in society's upper echelons, though there was an unmistakable edge to her manner, as though she wielded the power of her position with a firm, steady hand. She stood by the broad bay window of her sitting room, watching her guests drift among the rose beds and manicured lawns, her eyes bright but calculating. Her pale pink gown, delicately embroidered with tiny white flowers, caught the sunlight just so, and the white gloves she wore lent her a timeless dignity. She greeted arrivals with the practiced warmth of a seasoned hostess, though her smile never quite reached her eyes. Near her feet stood the Mantel clock, an imposing Edwardian masterpiece in dark mahogany carved with intricate floral motifs and polished to a deep gleam. It stood sentinel on the mantelpiece, its brass face gleaming softly in the afternoon light, filtering through the window. Its steady tick seemed a quiet heartbeat to the room, marking time with a solemn precision. Yet, despite its grandeur, it was easy to overlook amid the lively bustle of the party its significance hidden beneath layers of ordinary familiarity. Not far from the window, Miss Marple sat serenely on a wrought iron bench shaded by a sprawling chestnut tree, her knitting needles clicking softly as she worked. Her snowy hair was neatly pinned back, and her pale blue eyes held the calm wisdom of a lifetime spent observing the world from the quiet corners of small villages like this one. To the casual observer, she was merely a gentle old lady, enjoying the sunshine and the comfort of familiar faces. But beneath that mild exterior was a mind sharp as a razor, quietly cataloging the nuances of human behavior. The flicker of a glance, the subtle shift in posture, the unspoken tension beneath a polite smile. Throughout the garden, the villagers mingled with the usual blend of cordiality and veiled rivalry. Henry Ackroyd, the local solicitor, held court near the magnolia tree, his booming laughter punctuating a conversation with his wife, Clara. Clara, ever the picture of youthful vivacity, despite being well into her 40s, chatted animatedly, though Miss Marple's keen eyes caught the slight tremor in her hand as she lifted a dainty teacup. It was a small detail, but to Miss Marple, such details were the threads from which larger tapestries were woven. A little way off, Dr. James Harcourt recently returned to the village after years practicing in London, spoke quietly with Edith Farnsworth, the schoolmistress, whose reputation for stern discipline was well known. Edith's pinched expression suggested she was weighing some troubling thought, her brows drawn together as she listened. Nearby, young Timothy Brent, the grocer's son, darted among the guests, delivering trays of cucumber sandwiches with a boyish enthusiasm that belied his sharp, calculating gaze. Even the children were not exempt from Miss Marple's watchful attention. As the afternoon waned, the soft murmur of conversation was occasionally punctuated by the distant tolling of the village church bells, a reminder of the peaceful rhythm of life here. Yet, beneath the surface, subtle tension simmered. Miss Marple noticed how some guests avoided meeting certain others' eyes, how whispered comments ceased abruptly when approached, how hands clutched bags or gloves with a touch too much force. She was reminded, as she so often was, that beneath the calm exterior of small-town life lay undercurrents of secrets and resentments, old grievances waiting to be stirred. Suddenly, the tranquil atmosphere shattered. A sharp, strangled cry pierced the air, slicing through the chatter like a knife. Heads snapped toward the source, and a hush fell over the gathering as the villagers' faces shifted from amusement to alarm. Rosamond's butler, Mr. Collins, appeared in the doorway, his usually composed face ashen and drawn. "Miss Dalloway," he called urgently, his voice trembling with shock. "You must come quickly. There's been an accident in the study." A ripple of whispered speculation spread through the crowd. Rosamond's smile faded instantly, replaced by a look of stern resolve. "Everyone, please remain calm," she said, her voice steady, though her hands tightened at her sides. Miss Marple rose from her bench, her knitting forgotten, as a new focus took hold. She followed Mr. Collins through the open French doors into the house, the echo of hurried footsteps trailing behind them. The study was a room of heavy oak shelves, lined with leather-bound volumes and framed photographs, bathed in the soft glow of late afternoon light, filtering through lace curtains. But the warmth of the room was starkly contradicted by the sight before them. Lord Frederick Dalloway, a man known throughout the county for his commanding presence and strict demeanor, lay slumped over his desk, his eyes staring wide and unseeing at the blotter beneath his hands. His face was pale, almost waxen, and a faint metallic scent lingered in the air, a subtle yet unmistakable hint of something sinister. The mantel clock on the shelf above stood out immediately, its ticking silent, the hands frozen at exactly 3 minutes past 4. It was a small detail, but to Miss Marple it carried a weight far beyond the obvious. Her gaze lingered on the clock as Inspector Craddock, summoned promptly from the village police station, stepped into the room. The inspector's expression was grave but practiced, betraying no hint of surprise at the grim discovery. "A tragic affair, Mrs. Marple," he said quietly, nodding toward the body. "Preliminary signs point to poison, though we have yet to establish the exact source. Nothing appears disturbed, no sign of forced entry. It is a baffling case, to say the least." Miss Marple inclined her head thoughtfully. "It always seems to be the quietest moments, Inspector, that hold the loudest truths," she murmured. Her eyes swept the room, taking in the scattered papers on the desk, the half-empty teacup perched precariously on the blotter, and the faint smudge near the clock's base. Outside, the village was already abuzz with whispered rumors and mounting speculation. The news of Lord Dalloway's death had spread like wildfire, shattering the delicate veneer of the garden party and casting a pall over the community. The tranquility of St. Mary Mead was shattered, replaced by a tense undercurrent of fear and suspicion. As dusk fell, casting long shadows over the village lanes, Miss Marple found herself once again in the midst of a puzzle that called upon every ounce of her keen observation and understanding of human nature. The faces gathered before her were masks, some cracked, some carefully constructed. Beneath them lay secrets, motives that stretched far beyond the immediate tragedy. She noted the strained smiles, the sidelong glances exchanged between certain villagers, the nervous clearing of throats, and the habitual gestures of discomfort. Each detail was a piece of a larger mosaic, and Miss Marple, with the patience of a seasoned weaver, began to piece together the threads. The clock on the mantelpiece, silent yet resolute, seemed almost to mock the stillness of death that filled the room. In its frozen hands lay a clue, subtle yet vital, waiting for the moment to reveal the truth. Miss Marple, knitting needles once again in hand, was already listening, not only to words but to the silences between them, for in those quiet spaces the real story often dwelled. And so the mystery began. Chapter 2. The Village Reacts. The news of Lord Frederick Dalloway's sudden and mysterious death rippled swiftly through the tightly knit community of St. Mary Mead. By morning, the village was awash with whispered conversations, furtive glances, and a tension that seemed to hang as heavily in the air as the early summer mist. The garden party, once a cheerful gathering of friends and neighbors, was now a shadowed memory, eclipsed by the weight of tragedy and suspicion. From the bakery to the post office, the villagers gathered in small clusters, their voices hushed, yet fervent. It was a peculiar thing about small communities such as this. News traveled fast, and no secret remained hidden for long. As the hours passed, each person added their own speculation, weaving together fragments of truth and conjecture into a tapestry of theories, many flawed, some chillingly perceptive. Miss Marple, as ever, observed quietly from the fringes, her sharp eyes noting the subtleties beneath the surface chatter. She had no need to join the loudest voices, the softest remarks, the most fleeting expressions often revealed far more than outright declarations. Her gentle demeanor was a cloak, beneath which her keen mind moved with measured purpose. The village green was abuzz as the local grocer, Mr. George Brent, attempted to calm the growing unease among his customers. "It's dreadful, absolutely dreadful," he declared, rubbing his hands nervously. "One would never expect such a thing in our peaceful village. Lord Dalloway was a pillar of the community after all." "But who would want to harm him?" asked Mrs. Potter, the school teacher's wife, clutching her shawl tightly. "I heard he had enemies, though. Business disputes and some whispered affairs. But murder? Here?" "That's what I don't understand," said Mr. Ackroyd, the solicitor, leaning against the counter with a grave expression. "Frederick was not a man to make friends easily, but to think someone would go this far. Poison, no less. It's as though the killer knew exactly what they were doing." Miss Marple's thoughts drifted to the study's frozen mantel clock and the subtle metallic scent she had detected. Poison was an intimate weapon, one that spoke of careful planning and intimate knowledge. Such crimes, she knew, rarely sprang from impulse. Meanwhile, in the village's modest inn, the Fox and Hounds. The patrons gathered around the low oak tables, their conversation thick with speculation. Young Timothy Brent, ever curious and slightly giddy with the excitement of scandal, leaned in close to his mother. "Do you think it was Mr. Collins, the butler? I saw him looking rather pale yesterday." Mrs. Brent shushed him quickly. "Timothy, don't be ridiculous. Mr. Collins has served the Dalloways faithfully for years. Besides, the police haven't said anything about him." "But the butler always does it in the stories, doesn't he?" Timothy persisted, his eyes wide. Across the room, Dr. Harcourt shook his head, sipping his ale thoughtfully. "Real life is not like the stories, Timothy. The truth is often far more complex. Even the schoolmistress, Edith Farnsworth, whose reputation for sternness often kept the children in line with little effort, found herself drawn into the swirling rumors. She confided to Miss Marple over a cup of tea that morning, her voice lowered to a near whisper. "It's as if the village itself is holding its breath. The silence is more telling than the words." Miss Marple nodded gently. "Fear and suspicion have a way of settling like dust on old furniture, Edith. They conceal what lies beneath, but they also reveal what people dare not say aloud." As the day wore on, the whispers grew louder and more insistent. At the church, the vicar's wife remarked on the shock felt by the congregation, while the butchers speculated on the possible motives. Each voice added a new layer to the unfolding drama. Amidst these swirling currents of gossip, Miss Marple's attention remained focused on the individuals themselves, their mannerisms, their hidden anxieties, and the subtle clues in their interactions. Mrs. Clara Ackroyd's nervous glances, the strained cordiality between Dr. Harcourt and Edith Farnsworth, and the unusually tight grip Mr. Collins held on his serving tray, all spoke to her in ways words could not. At the Dalloway estate, a different kind of quiet had settled. The grand house, usually alive with the sounds of activity and polite conversation, now stood hushed and somber. Rosamond Dalloway, steadfast and composed, had taken charge of the household, ensuring that the servants maintained their duties with discreet efficiency. Yet even she could not hide the shadow that lingered in her eyes. When Inspector Craddock returned for further questioning, Rosamond was calm but resolute. "We must remember, Inspector, that appearances can deceive. There are things in this village that even I do not fully understand." The inspector nodded, aware that the case was far from straightforward. "Indeed, Lady Dalloway, in cases like this, it is often the unseen threads, the quiet grudges, the whispered resentments that unravel the truth." Back in the village, the tension was palpable. Shops saw fewer customers as people chose to stay indoors, and children's laughter was replaced by cautious silences. The local newspaper carried the headline, "Murder Shatters Saint." Mary Mead's peace. Letters of condolence and curiosity arrived from neighboring towns, drawing outsiders' eyes to the village's dark secret. Throughout it all, Miss Marple remained a constant presence, quietly piecing together the human puzzle. She recalled how, in the past, the smallest details had cracked even the most baffling mysteries. A misplaced letter, a reluctant smile, the catch of a breath. Her thoughts often returned to the mantel clock, silent now in the drawing room, its hands fixed in time. What had it witnessed? What secret did it guard within, its polished wood and ticking heart? In the quiet moments between the gossip and grief, Miss Marple reflected on the nature of the village itself, the intertwined lives, the buried grievances, and the fragile trust that had been so violently broken. She understood that to find the truth she would have to look beyond the surface, reading the unspoken stories written in expressions, gestures, and silences. And so, as evening fell and the village settled under a blanket of stars, the investigation began in earnest. The web of suspicion spread wide, and Miss Marple's steady mind prepared to unravel it, one delicate thread at a time. The peaceful village of St. Mary Mead would never be quite the same again. Chapter 3. Early Investigation. The morning after the tragedy, St. Mary Mead awoke to a somber stillness that felt foreign and oppressive. The birds seemed quieter, their usual melodies muted, and the village paths bore a reluctant silence where the usual chatter and footsteps might have been. It was as though the earth itself were holding its breath, waiting for answers that refused to come. Miss Marple rose early, the weight of the previous day's events settling in her bones like a persistent chill. Her morning routine proceeded with quiet precision, a cup of weak tea sipped by the window, the rustle of the village newspaper in her hands, and her mind already racing ahead to the tangled threads she knew awaited her unraveling. There was something about the way people reacted to death in a small community that fascinated her. Beneath the surface of grief and shock lay a subtle theater of human nature, a play where every glance and gesture was a carefully rehearsed act. Her first visitor arrived promptly, a messenger from Inspector Craddock requesting her presence at the Dalloway estate for a preliminary discussion. Miss Marple accepted without hesitation. She knew that the early stages of an investigation were crucial, that the slightest oversight could divert the course of justice, and that her subtle observations might reveal what the inspector's formal inquiries overlooked. The grand house loomed under a slate-gray sky, its facade more imposing than comforting in the subdued light of morning. Rosamond Dalloway met her at the door, her expression composed, though faintly strained. "Thank you for coming, Mrs. Marple. I hope you understand my need to entrust this delicate matter to those who know the village well." Miss Marple inclined her head gently. "Indeed, Lady Dalloway. Sometimes the answers lie not in the evidence itself, but in the spaces between it, the unspoken, the overlooked." The study where Lord Dalloway's body had been found was sealed off, a quiet chamber now burdened with the gravity of death. Inspector Craddock greeted Miss Marple with a curt nod, his professional demeanor shadowed by the weight of the case. "Mrs. Marple, I'm grateful you could come. I have conducted a thorough search of the house, but the poison's origin eludes us." Miss Marple's eyes swept the room, lingering for a moment on the heavy oak desk still cluttered with papers and an unopened letter. She noticed the faintest smudge on the blotter and a faintly displaced stack of books. The mantel clock, conspicuously silent, caught her gaze once more. "Such a precise moment to cease ticking," she murmured, as if time itself hesitated. The inspector raised an eyebrow, but said nothing. He was accustomed to her enigmatic remarks. Their conversation turned to the guests at the ill-fated garden party. Miss Marple quietly recounted the faces and mannerisms she had observed, the nervous twitch in Mrs. Ackroyd's hand, Dr. Harcourt's guarded tone, and the schoolmistress's pinched expression. "People often wear masks when confronted with distress," she remarked, It is in the cracks of those masks that truth begins to show. Craddock nodded thoughtfully. I've begun interviewing the guests and household staff. So far, no one reports unusual behavior, yet something must have happened before or during the party. Miss Marple agreed, then requested the opportunity to speak with the household staff privately. Over the course of the morning, she moved through the kitchen, the servants' quarters, and the expansive corridors, listening more than questioning. The butler, Mr. Collins, a man of precise movements and quiet speech, denied any knowledge of suspicious visitors or strange happenings. Yet Miss Marple observed a subtle stiffness in his posture, a guardedness that hinted at withheld information. The cook, Mrs. Beasley, was frank and outspoken. Nothing amiss, Miss Marple. Lord Dalloway was a difficult man, yes, but he kept his meals consistent. If something had been wrong with his food or drink, I'd have noticed. Her eyes narrowed. Though I'll admit, I never did like that new gardener. Always lurking about, eyes too curious. Miss Marple made a mental note. The gardener was an unfamiliar element in a place where the staff was usually stable and long-serving. Later, Miss Marple sat in the drawing-room with Rosamond Dalloway and Mrs. Ackroyd. Clara Ackroyd's usual vivacity seemed dimmed, her hands trembling slightly as she toyed with the lace on her handkerchief. Rosamond spoke of her late husband's recent irritability and business troubles, but was careful not to accuse. I thought Frederick's harshness a mask for deeper worries, Rosamond said quietly. There were disputes, yes, but I cannot believe anyone here wished him harm. Miss Marple nodded, sensing the fragile balance Rosamond sought to maintain. In a small village, Lady Dalloway, resentment is often hidden beneath polite smiles. The surface may appear calm, but beneath, currents run strong. The afternoon brought more interviews. Dr. Harcourt, pressed gently, revealed Lord Dalloway's recent health concerns, a lingering malaise he had dismissed, but which perhaps contributed to his irritability. Edith Farnsworth, too, spoke of tensions among the villagers, whispered grievances, old friendships fraying, and a social atmosphere thick with unease. Miss Marple noticed a shared reluctance to speak openly, as though some truths were considered too dangerous or shameful. It was a web she had seen many times before, a village protecting itself, even as it fractured from within. As dusk settled, Miss Marple returned home, her thoughts weaving patterns from the day's fragments. The silent clock haunted her mind, its frozen hands a symbol of suspended time and hidden truths. The subtle clues, the misplaced book, the faint smudge, the trembling hands, all formed an intricate mosaic. She understood that the case was not simply about poison, but about the delicate, complicated dance of human relationships, where secrets festered beneath the veneer of civility. It was a puzzle demanding patience, insight, and an unerring eye for the smallest details. And Miss Marple, with her quiet strength and unassuming presence, was uniquely equipped to unravel it. Chapter 4. First Suspects. The morning sun rose over St. Mary Mead with a muted glow, as if hesitant to illuminate a village shrouded in unease. The usual bustle of market stalls and cheerful greetings was subdued, replaced by quiet conversations that skirted the edges of suspicion and fear. News of Lord Dalloway's death continued to spread, and with it came the inevitable search for culpability, a human tendency to find a face to blame in moments of tragedy. Inspector Craddock's investigation was well underway, and Miss Marple found herself drawn into the unfolding drama not as a mere observer but as a quiet force guiding the search for truth. The inspector, with his earnest yet somewhat conventional approach, had already begun identifying potential suspects. The villagers, with their well-worn histories and tangled relationships, offered no shortage of intrigue. Foremost among the early suspects was Mr. Collins, the butler, whose pallid complexion and nervous demeanor had not gone unnoticed. Although his service to the Dalloway household had been impeccable for decades, there was something in the way he avoided direct eye contact that gave pause. Some whispered that Mr. Collins had grown resentful in recent months, slighted by changes within the household and the arrival of new staff. Miss Marple, however, approached the butler's case with gentle skepticism. "Sometimes," she said to Inspector Craddock during one of their morning meetings, "a man's discomfort arises not from guilt, but from the burden of grief and the fear of suspicion." She had spent time in quiet conversation with Mr. Collins, observing the butler's measured responses and noticing the subtle tremor in his hands as he arranged teacups. The butler spoke of his devotion to the family and his shock at the events, but there was a reserve in his words that suggested deeper turmoil. Still, Miss Marple found no overt signs of malice or deception. Another figure attracting attention was Mrs. Clara Ackroyd, the solicitor's wife. Her nervous gestures and unsteady voice when questioned sparked whispers of secret fears. It was said she had recently quarreled with Lord Dalloway over a disputed piece of land. Although the matter seemed minor, in a village like St. Mary Mead, even small conflicts could fester into bitterness. Clara herself appeared fragile, her smile often faltering beneath the weight of whispered accusations. When Miss Marple met her in the village bakery, Clara's eyes brimmed with tears as she insisted on her innocence. "I never wished him harm," she said, her voice trembling. "Frederick could be harsh, but murder, it is unthinkable." Yet Miss Marple observed that beneath Clara's distress lay a complex mixture of fear, regret, and something less easily discerned, a shadow perhaps of guilt, or simply the anguish of a woman caught in an impossible situation. Dr. James Harcourt was not immune to suspicion either. His recent return from London and his quiet association with several villagers placed him under scrutiny. Though his demeanor was calm and professional, there were those who whispered about past grievances and professional rivalries with Lord Dalloway, particularly over matters of health and estate. Miss Marple had spoken with the doctor at length, noting his careful choice of words and the subtle tension in his manner. He spoke of Lord Dalloway's deteriorating health and his own concerns, yet there was an elusive quality to his explanations. Perhaps it was the weight of unspoken worries, or the natural reserve of a man accustomed to discretion. The schoolmistress, Edith Farnsworth, presented a different kind of enigma. Known for her rigid discipline and exacting standards, Edith was a figure both respected and feared in the village. Some recalled that she and Lord Dalloway had clashed publicly over the education of his grandchildren, leading to rumors of grudges held beneath the surface. When Miss Marple visited the schoolhouse, Edith's demeanor was stiff, her answers clipped but measured. "Lord Dalloway and I had our differences," she admitted, "but I am no murderer. I would never harm a child's grandfather, whatever our disagreements." Still, there was a hardness in Edith's eyes that suggested she guarded secrets fiercely, and Miss Marple sensed that beneath her austere exterior lay a reservoir of emotions yet to be revealed. Then there was Timothy Brent, the grocer's son, whose boyish enthusiasm for gossip often veered into the realm of rumor and fantasy. His recent sightings of a stranger lingering near the Dalloway estate raised questions. Who was this mysterious gardener, and what connection did he have to the household? Miss Marple had taken the time to speak with Timothy, gently sifting fact from fancy. The boy's tale was peppered with exaggerations, but there was truth in his unease. The gardener was indeed a newcomer, hired only a few weeks prior, and his background was unclear. As evening descended on the village, the list of suspects grew longer, each wrapped in layers of motive, opportunity, and human complexity. Yet, for all the outward suspicion, Miss Marple remained unshaken. She knew that the first suspects were often the easiest to name, but the hardest to convict. She spent long hours in her sitting room, knitting quietly as she pondered the faces and stories of those entwined in the tragedy. The silent mantel clock, now carefully packed away by the servants, lingered in her thoughts, a reminder that time and circumstance held secrets that only patience and insight could unveil. Miss Marple was certain of one thing: the truth was hidden, not in grand gestures or loud accusations, but in the small, overlooked details, the glances exchanged in silence, the hesitation in a reply, the contradictions in a story. The village of St. Mary Mead was a fragile web of relationships, and it would take all her subtlety to untangle it without breaking the delicate threads that bound its people together. As she prepared to meet again with Inspector Craddock, Miss Marple felt the familiar thrill of the chase, the quiet excitement of peeling back the layers of human nature to reveal what lay beneath. The first suspects had been named, but the real story was only beginning to emerge, and Miss Marple, with her gentle determination and astute mind, was ready to follow it wherever it might lead. Chapter 5. A Hidden Clue. The quiet days following the emergence of the first suspects unfolded in a haze of interviews, observations, and whispered conversations that seemed to fill every corner of St. Mary Mead. Yet, amidst the surface noise of speculation, there lay subtle details easily overlooked, delicate threads in the fabric of the investigation that only the keenest eye could discern. Miss Marple had long understood that, more often than not, the truth was concealed not in the grand gestures or loud accusations, but in the smallest, most inconspicuous clues. That afternoon, Miss Marple returned to the Dalloway estate, not as a visitor or observer, but as a woman intent on noticing what others had missed. The household moved with a somber efficiency, the servants carrying out their duties with a mechanical precision that spoke of suppressed anxiety. The study, still sealed off from the public eye, was inaccessible, but the drawing room, with its familiar furniture and warm light, welcomed her as a sanctuary for quiet contemplation. As she settled into her favorite armchair by the window, Miss Marple's gaze drifted once again to the mantel clock, though it had been carefully removed from the study and placed here for safekeeping. Its silent face and frozen hands carried the weight of time suspended. It was a grand piece, exquisitely carved, yet there was something about its presence that stirred a faint unease within her. Mrs. Beasley, the cook, entered quietly with a tray of tea and biscuits, her face etched with worry, but softened by the familiarity of Miss Marple's calm presence. "I thought you might like some refreshment, Mrs. Marple," she said softly. "Thank you," Mrs. Beasley. "You have a kind heart," Miss Marple replied with a gentle smile. "Have you noticed anything unusual about the clock, or anything at all out of place in the house these last few days?" Mrs. Beasley paused, considering. "Well, now that you mention it, Miss Marple, I did see Mr. Collins fussing over the clock a few evenings ago. He seemed troubled, as if he were looking for something." Miss Marple's interest deepened. "Looking for something, you say?" "Yes, ma'am. He handled the clock rather carefully, and then he seemed to check behind it, as if the clock might be hiding a secret." That small revelation sparked a cascade of thoughts. Miss Marple had always known that in houses of great age and tradition, treasures and secrets often hid in plain sight, disguised as mundane objects. She rose gracefully and walked over to the mantelpiece, her fingers brushing lightly over the polished wood of the clock. The faintest trace of dust had gathered where the clock met the wall, but what caught her eye was a subtle scratch, a barely perceptible mark that suggested the clock had been moved recently. Later that day, Miss Marple requested to speak privately with Mr. Collins. The butler's eyes widened in surprise at her summons, but he soon settled into his usual composed manner when she entered the servants' quarters. The room smelled faintly of lavender and old wood, a comforting blend that belied the tension hanging in the air. "Mr. Collins," Miss Marple began gently, "I understand the strain you are under, but there are questions that must be answered. You mentioned the clock and the movements you made around it. Could you tell me more about what you were seeking?" The butler hesitated, a flicker of emotion crossing his features before his professional mask resumed. "It is difficult to speak of such matters, Mrs. Marple, but I had reason to believe that Lord Dalloway kept certain documents hidden within the study. Documents of importance, perhaps relating to his estate and affairs. The clock was always near his desk, and I thought it possible that something might be concealed behind or within it." Miss Marple nodded slowly. "An astute observation. And did you find anything?" Mr. Collins's jaw tightened. "No, I did not, but I could not help but wonder if someone else had searched the same spot before me." The notion unsettled Miss Marple. Someone had reason to tamper with the clock, perhaps to hide or retrieve something vital. The question was what, and who? That evening, back in the quiet of her own home, Miss Marple sifted through her notes and memories of the villagers' reactions and revelations. The clock, once a simple timepiece marking the passage of hours, now seemed a keeper of secrets, its silent face staring back with inscrutable intent. Miss Marple's mind wandered to the disputes Lord Dalloway had faced, the land quarrel with Clara Ackroyd, the disagreements with Edith Farnsworth over the children's education, and the shadowed tensions with Dr. Harcourt. Could one of these grievances have escalated to a desperate act involving hidden papers or evidence? The following day, Miss Marple paid a quiet visit to the local jeweler and clockmaker, Mr. Perkins, a man of meticulous nature and deep knowledge of his craft. She inquired about the clock's construction and possible secret compartments. Mr. Perkins examined the clock with keen interest. "This is a fine piece, Mrs. Marple. Edwardian, as you guessed, and very well made. Some clocks of this sort were known to have hidden compartments behind the face or within the mechanism, spaces used for safekeeping small valuables or documents. I would be surprised if this one were any different." Miss Marple smiled thoughtfully. It seems the clock is more than a mere ornament. It may well hold the key to much more than time. The suggestion that the clock could conceal evidence added a new dimension to the investigation. The inspector's team agreed to carefully dismantle the clock for further examination, hoping to uncover what lay behind its wooden facade. Meanwhile, the villagers continued to reel from the shock, their suspicions swirling as freely as ever. Clara Ackroyd was observed speaking in hushed tones with an unfamiliar visitor, while Dr. Harcourt took a solitary walk along the village lane, his expression unreadable. Edith Farnsworth's sharp gaze seemed to follow Miss Marple more often than before, as if wary of the old lady's quiet inquiries. Amid this delicate dance of secrets and suspicion, Miss Marple kept her observations close, aware that each small detail might yet prove the turning point. The clock had revealed its first secret, that beneath its surface, in the shadows of polished wood and ticking gears, lay the promise of answers waiting to be found. And Miss Marple, with her patient wisdom and unerring intuition, was prepared to uncover them, one subtle clue at a time. Chapter 6. Confrontations and Secrets. The early days of the investigation had woven a delicate but tangled web of suspicions and half-spoken truths throughout St. Mary Mead. The villagers found themselves caught in the slow currents of unease, their once comfortable routines now shadowed by whispered accusations and guarded interactions. The hidden lives beneath the village's genteel surface began to unfurl, one secret at a time, as if the murder had unlocked a door that could no longer be closed. Miss Marple, with her characteristic quietude, continued her subtle, persistent gathering of observations. She knew that beneath the polite smiles and measured words lay a complex dance of emotions: resentment, fear, jealousy, and regret that formed the true landscape of the tragedy. The events at the Dalloway estate had drawn these emotions into the open, forcing the villagers into unaccustomed confrontations, some gentle, others sharp and bitter. One afternoon, Miss Marple found herself walking the narrow village lane, the soft crunch of her footsteps mingling with the distant chatter of children playing. She was on her way to visit Clara Ackroyd, whose recent distress had piqued her interest. The solicitor's wife was known for her charm and lively spirit, but of late her laughter had been strained and her eyes clouded with worry. Clara received her with a hesitant warmth, the tension in the room thick enough to be felt like a physical weight. They sat in the airy sitting room, sunlight filtering through lace curtains, casting intricate patterns on the worn carpet. "Mrs. Marple," Clara began, her voice trembling, "these past days have been unbearable. The suspicion, the questions. It is as though everyone believes I had reason to wish Frederick ill." Miss Marple nodded sympathetically. "Fear often breeds suspicion, Clara, but truth is not always so cruel. Tell me, have you anything you wish to share? Sometimes the burden lessens when one speaks plainly." Clara hesitated, then sighed, her hands wringing the edge of a handkerchief. "Frederick and we had our differences. The dispute over the land was only the surface. Beneath it were years of misunderstandings, of things left unsaid. He could be harsh, but I never thought it would come to this." Her eyes filled with tears. "There is something else. Something I have kept hidden." Miss Marple waited patiently, the silence encouraging. Clara's voice dropped to a whisper. "I discovered a letter hidden among Frederick's papers. It hinted at secrets within the village, affairs, debts, betrayals. I feared it might destroy reputations, so I kept it to myself. But now, I wonder if those secrets are at the heart of his death. The revelation was significant, adding layers to the mystery. Miss Marple made a mental note to inquire further into these whispered scandals, knowing that, in a small village, such secrets could fester for years. The waiting game, waiting for the right moment to surface. Later that day, Miss Marple attended a gathering at the church hall where villagers had come together to discuss the unsettling events. The atmosphere was charged, voices rising and falling with a mix of concern and accusation. Edith Farnsworth, the school mistress, stood near the refreshments, her posture rigid, eyes sharp. A few villagers approached her cautiously, their questions probing but polite. Miss Marple observed a brief but intense exchange between Edith and Dr. Harcourt, whose recent return had placed him under scrutiny. Their words were clipped, their expressions guarded. A silent battle of wills beneath the surface. Curious, Miss Marple found a moment to speak privately with Edith. Mrs. Farnsworth, it is clear that these events have unsettled us all, but I sense there are tensions beyond what has been spoken. Edith's gaze was steely. Lord Dalloway and I disagreed on many matters. He had strong opinions about education and the future of his grandchildren. Our quarrels were well known, but I would never have harmed him. Miss Marple's eyes softened. Arguments can be passionate but transient. It is the grudges held silently that endure. Edith's lips tightened, then parted as if to speak further, but she refrained. The unspoken words hung between them like a delicate thread. Meanwhile, the household staff at the Dalloway estate found themselves under renewed scrutiny. Mr. Collins's careful demeanor cracked slightly when questioned about the clock and the possibility of hidden compartments. His insistence that he had acted out of loyalty seemed sincere, but Miss Marple detected a flicker of hesitation when the subject turned to recent visitors. The new gardener, a man named Samuel Whitaker, had drawn attention with his quiet presence and enigmatic past. Some villagers whispered that he had come from the city, bringing with him secrets of his own. His work was impeccable, but his eyes betrayed a wariness that suggested he was guarding more than just the grounds. Miss Marple arranged to visit the gardener's modest cottage on the village outskirts, a tidy but sparse dwelling that reflected the man's reserved nature. Samuel welcomed her politely, but with measured reserve. Over tea, Miss Marple gently probed. "Mr. Whitaker, you have been here only a short time. Have you noticed anything unusual in the days leading up to Lord Dalloway's death?" The gardener considered her question carefully. "Nothing out of the ordinary, Mrs. Marple, though I did see Mr. Collins near the study on the evening before the party. It seemed he was searching for something." The comment echoed Mrs. Beasley's earlier observation and deepened the mystery surrounding the butler's actions. Back in the village square, tensions rose as accusations began to take more pointed forms. Mrs. Potter, the schoolteacher's wife, voiced concerns about trust and loyalty. "We must remember," she cautioned, "that beneath every smile may lie motives we cannot see. It is not enough to assume innocence." Miss Marple listened with quiet resolve, knowing that the fractured relationships and simmering resentments were the true battleground. Each confrontation peeled back layers of the village's polished exterior, revealing fractures that had long been hidden. As twilight deepened, Miss Marple returned to her cottage, her thoughts a tapestry of tangled secrets and human frailty. The revelations of the day, the hidden letter, the strained conversations, the gardener's wary eyes, all pointed toward a deeper truth yet to be uncovered. She sat by her window, the mantel clock in her parlor ticking steadily, a stark contrast to the silent one at the Dalloway estate. Time, she mused, moved forward relentlessly, yet the answers seemed to linger just beyond reach. In the coming days, Miss Marple knew that more confrontations would come, more secrets would surface, and the true nature of the village's darkness would begin to take shape. But for now, she allowed herself a moment of quiet reflection, knowing that patience and careful observation were the tools that would ultimately bring the truth to light. Chapter 7. Another twist. The tranquility of St. Mary Mead had long been shattered, replaced by a restless undercurrent that wound its way through the village like a slow-moving fog. Days of quiet suspicion had given way to restless tension, and as the investigation deepened, the contours of the mystery grew more complex and disconcerting. For Miss Marple, the unfolding events revealed yet another layer to the puzzle, a twist that threatened to upend the carefully woven theories held by the villagers and investigators alike. The unexpected arrival of a second tragedy at the edge of the village sent shockwaves through the community. Early one misty morning, the body of a local woman, Mrs. Eliza Clemens, was discovered in the meadow bordering the river. The coroner's initial assessment was unclear whether it was an accident, natural causes, or something more sinister remained to be seen, but the timing could not have been more unsettling. Eliza Clemens was a figure familiar to all, the widow of a retired naval officer, known for her kindness and discreet involvement in village affairs. Her death, under such mysterious circumstances, raised uneasy questions about its connection to Lord Dalloway's murder. Was the village cursed, or was there a sinister force moving unseen among its cobbled lanes? Miss Marple, upon hearing the news, felt a pang of concern that transcended curiosity. She understood, better than most, how coincidence could mask the deeper threads tying such events together. At the Dalloway estate, the atmosphere had grown heavier still. Rosamond Dalloway's composure, once a pillar of steadiness, began to show cracks. The loss of her husband was compounded by the sudden death of a close family friend and the growing suspicions among their circle. Inspector Craddock, mindful of the new development, convened an urgent meeting with Miss Marple and key members of the village. The drawing room was filled with tension, voices low and urgent. "We must consider the possibility that Mrs. Clemens's death is connected to Lord Dalloway's," Craddock said gravely. "This could suggest a wider conspiracy, or at least a common thread we have yet to uncover." Miss Marple nodded thoughtfully. When one darkness spreads, it often reveals the hidden fractures beneath. We must tread carefully, for fear can drive even the most cautious to desperate acts. Among the villagers, the news sparked a flurry of whispers. Some saw the deaths as unrelated tragedies, while others speculated wildly of curses and long-held vendettas. The villagers' uneasy glances, their avoidance of certain conversations, spoke volumes. Miss Marple, however, sought tangible clues beyond superstition. She revisited the scene of Mrs. Clemens's death at the riverbank, walking the dew-damp grass with measured steps. The spot was peaceful, the soft ripple of water over stones a stark contrast to the grim discovery it had recently witnessed. She noted footprints in the mud, some belonging to Eliza herself, others more recent, suggesting that someone had been there not long before the body was found. Among the grass, she spotted a delicate scarf, partially torn, caught on a bramble. The scarf bore a faint floral pattern, one she recognized from the village market, but unusual for Mrs. Clemens. Intrigued, Miss Marple pocketed the scarf and returned to her cottage for closer examination. The discovery suggested the presence of another person at the scene, one whose identity and motives would become vital in understanding this new tragedy. Meanwhile, back at the Dalloway estate, the clock that had once been a silent sentinel to Lord Dalloway's demise had been carefully dismantled by the inspector's team. Inside its ornate casing, hidden behind the ticking mechanism, was a small compartment containing a folded bundle of papers. Among these were financial documents, letters hinting at blackmail, and a torn photograph that included an unfamiliar face, a clue that hinted at secrets extending beyond the immediate circle. The revelation sent ripples through the investigation. The photograph's mysterious figure was traced to a man named Charles Wentworth, a businessman with murky dealings who had recently visited the village under the pretense of purchasing property. His presence suggested a wider scope of intrigue, one that reached beyond personal vendettas and into the shadows of greed and deception. Miss Marple pieced together the implications slowly, understanding that the case was no longer just about one death, but about the unraveling of hidden alliances and betrayals woven into the fabric of the village's recent past. As the days passed, the villagers' behavior grew more erratic. Clara Ackroyd was seen hurriedly packing belongings, while Dr. Harcourt made unexplained trips to the nearby town. Edith Farnsworth's stern facade wavered in moments of private sorrow. The gardener, Samuel Whitaker, disappeared altogether, leaving behind an empty cottage and unanswered questions. Conversations in the village grew charged with fear and suspicion. The once cordial meetings at the market gave way to whispered warnings and cautious avoidance. The delicate balance of the community was slipping, and with it, the truth seemed to recede further into shadows. Through it all, Miss Marple remained the calm center, her mind ever alert to the subtle signs. The twist in the case was a stark reminder that human nature was complex, and that in St. Mary Mead, beneath the placid surface, currents of passion and desperation ran deep. The hidden truths, cloaked in silence and shadow, were beginning to surface, and Miss Marple, with her quiet resolve and keen understanding of the human heart, was prepared to face whatever revelations lay ahead. Chapter 8. Miss Marple's Final Test. The village of St. Mary Mead had descended into a restless unease, a fragile calm punctuated by suspicion and unspoken fears. With each passing day, the web of secrets grew denser, and the fractures between neighbors widened. The two deaths, Lord Dalloway's and Mrs. Clemens's, were bound by invisible threads, and the villagers felt the pressure of impending revelation pressing upon their lives. Miss Marple, serene and unassuming, had spent countless hours observing, listening, and reflecting. She understood that the key to unraveling the mystery lay not in the grand gestures or loud accusations, but in the subtle play of human behavior, the flicker of an eyelid, the tightening of a fist, the hesitation in a voice. She had learned long ago that in the quiet moments the truth often slipped through the cracks. With this understanding, Miss Marple resolved to engage one of the suspects in a subtle psychological test, a carefully crafted interaction designed to draw out a revealing reaction. It was a delicate game of shadows and mirrors, and she knew that those who carried guilt often betrayed themselves in the smallest details. Her choice fell upon Clara Ackroyd, whose nervous demeanor and tangled emotions had long piqued her curiosity. Clara was a woman caught between fear and hope, guilt and innocence, and Miss Marple sensed that beneath her fragility lay truths that only a carefully measured encounter could reveal. On a soft autumn afternoon, Miss Marple invited Clara for tea at her cottage. The sun filtered gently through the lace curtains, casting patterns on the worn wooden floor and lending an air of peaceful intimacy to the room. Clara arrived, looking pale but composed, her hands trembling slightly as she accepted the offered cup. They settled into comfortable chairs, the quiet punctuated only by the soft ticking of Miss Marple's mantel clock, a stark contrast to the silent, ominous timepiece at the Dalloway estate. Miss Marple began the conversation with gentle inquiries about Clara's well-being, allowing her guest to speak freely of her fears and frustrations. Gradually, the discussion turned to the events surrounding Lord Dalloway's death. Miss Marple spoke of the tangled relationships in the village, the disputes and misunderstandings, and the heavy burden of secrets. Clara listened intently, her fingers tightening around the teacup. Then, with careful subtlety, Miss Marple introduced the subject of the torn photograph found within the clock, a photograph that included a shadowy figure whose identity had yet to be determined. "It is curious, is it not," Miss Marple mused, "how images, like memories, can reveal and conceal in equal measure." Clara's breath caught, her eyes flickering momentarily with something between fear and recognition. Miss Marple noted the slight tremor in her voice as she asked, "Do you know anything of this gentleman?" Clara hesitated, then shook her head slowly. "No, I do not. I swear, Mrs. Marple, I have never seen him before." Miss Marple inclined her head thoughtfully, sensing the delicate balancing act Clara was performing. She decided to probe further, weaving into the conversation a tale of a similar village mystery she once knew, an old case where a hidden letter had undone a respected family. The story, though gentle, carried a pointed message. Secrets, when left unspoken, could destroy more than reputations. They could shatter lives. Clara's composure began to unravel. Tears welled in her eyes as she confessed, "There is so much I have not told. I feared what might happen if I spoke." Encouraged, Miss Marple listened as Clara slowly revealed a web of blackmail, jealousy, and betrayal, motives that reached far deeper than a land dispute or social quarrel. It emerged that Lord Dalloway had been the target of manipulation, his own vulnerabilities exploited by those closest to him. Meanwhile, across the village, other pieces of the puzzle fell into place. The disappearance of Samuel Whitaker, the gardener, was explained by his sudden departure after a heated argument with Mr. Collins, which was discovered through careful questioning. His involvement in the darker undercurrents of the village life became clearer, revealing a connection to Charles Wentworth, the mysterious businessman. In a dramatic turn, Inspector Craddock obtained a warrant to search Wentworth's properties, uncovering forged documents and evidence of financial schemes designed to seize control of the Dalloway estate. The tangled affair revealed a conspiracy that was as much about greed and power as personal vendettas. As these revelations came to light, the villagers' fear gave way to a fragile hope that justice would prevail. Yet Miss Marple knew that the ultimate truth depended on unmasking the murderer, the person who had struck not just for wealth, but with a cold calculation that few could comprehend. Returning to her cottage one evening, Miss Marple sat quietly by the fire, reflecting on the day's progress. She understood that the final confrontation was near, and that her subtle psychological test with Clara had been a crucial step in unraveling the last threads. The quiet tick of the clock marked the passage of time, and with it, the steady approach of justice. Miss Marple's mind was sharp, her resolve unwavering. The village of St. Mary Mead would soon breathe free again, and the secrets that had threatened its heart would be laid bare. Chapter 9. The Reveal. The late afternoon sun cast long, dappled shadows across the village green of St. Mary Mead, where the community had gathered, their faces marked by a mix of anticipation and apprehension. Word had spread swiftly that Miss Marple wished to address the villagers and those involved in the recent tragedies. The gravity of the occasion was evident in the hush that fell as she stepped forward, her delicate figure framed against the ancient oak tree beneath which she had chosen to speak. Miss Marple's gaze swept slowly across the assembled faces, some familiar, others marked by tension and guarded expression. Each person carried the weight of the past weeks, grief, suspicion, and the fragile hope for clarity. She knew that the moment demanded both delicacy and forthrightness. To unravel the web of deceit and sorrow, the truth must emerge gently but decisively. She began by recounting the sequence of events that had shaken the village: Lord Dalloway's sudden death, the mysterious circumstances surrounding Mrs. Clemens's passing, and the shadowy figures that had drifted in and out of the village's life. Her words were measured, weaving a narrative that drew the listeners in, compelling them to remember details, both obvious and subtle. As we have seen, Miss Marple continued, the outward calm of our village conceals the complexities of human nature, secret resentments, jealousies, and fears that, when left unspoken, can fester and lead to tragedy. It is in understanding these human hearts that we find the true path to justice. Her voice softened as she addressed the mantel clock, the silent witness to Lord Dalloway's final moments. This clock, a steadfast guardian of time, concealed a secret within its depths, a bundle of papers revealing motives and schemes that lay beneath the surface of civility. She paused, allowing the weight of her words to settle before moving to the heart of her revelation. The torn photograph found within the clock introduced us to Mr. Charles Wentworth, a man whose greed and duplicity have brought ruin upon those who trusted him. Miss Marple's gaze fixed on several faces among the crowd, settling finally on one, Clara Ackroyd. The tension in Clara's frame was palpable. Her eyes, wide with a mixture of fear and relief, met Miss Marple's steady gaze. It was Mrs. Ackroyd's courage in revealing the hidden letter, Miss Marple said gently, that illuminated the darkest corners of this mystery. Within those pages we discovered evidence of blackmail and betrayal, motives that drove men and women alike to desperate acts. Turning then to Inspector Craddock, Miss Marple acknowledged the tireless efforts that had brought the investigation to this pivotal moment. With his keen eye and steadfast determination, Inspector Craddock uncovered the links between the village's shadow dealings and the wider conspiracies that threatened its peace. The gathered crowd murmured, the atmosphere thick with anticipation. Miss Marple's voice lowered, drawing her audience closer to the moment they had awaited. But at the heart of this tragedy lies the one who acted with cold calculation, the murderer who sought to silence Lord Dalloway and those who stood in the way of their ambitions. She took a breath, steady and calm, then revealed the final piece of the puzzle. The true culprit was none other than Mr. Collins, the butler, whose loyalty had been a facade masking years of hidden resentment and personal grievance. Miss Marple recounted the subtle signs, his unusual presence near the study, the nervous handling of the mantel clock, and the inconsistencies in his account of the days before the murder. Mr. Collins, she said quietly, used his position to conceal his actions, manipulating the household and those around him. The hidden documents within the clock were his attempt to cover his tracks and shift suspicion elsewhere. The butler's face, pale and drawn, betrayed no protest, only a resigned acceptance. The villagers gasped softly, the shock tempered by the quiet certainty of Miss Marple's logic. In the moments that followed, Inspector Craddock stepped forward to formally arrest Mr. Collins, ensuring that justice would be served with due process. The villagers, still processing the revelation, began to murmur among themselves, relief mingled with sorrow for the betrayal by one they had trusted. Miss Marple concluded the gathering with a reflection on the fragile nature of community and the complexities of human nature. In small villages such as ours, where lives are entwined and histories shared, the capacity for kindness and cruelty exists side by side. It is only through understanding and vigilance that we protect the bonds that hold us together. As the crowd dispersed beneath the fading light, the village of St. Mary Mead began the slow process of healing. The silent mantel clock, now restored to its rightful place, seemed to mark not only the passage of time but the restoration of order. Miss Marple, watching the villagers from a quiet corner, allowed herself a moment of peace. The truth had been uncovered, the guilty brought to light, and the delicate balance of the village preserved. Yet she knew that beneath every calm surface stories waited, and human nature would always weave its mysteries anew. Chapter 10. Restoring the Quiet. The village of St. Mary Mead seemed to breathe again under the gentle light of a crisp autumn morning, its familiar rhythms slowly reassembling like a carefully woven tapestry mended after a sudden tear. The sharp edges of suspicion had softened, and while the memories of recent tragedies lingered like a fading mist, the community was resolute in its determination to reclaim the peace so cruelly disrupted. Miss Marple awoke early, as was her habit, to the comforting chorus of birdsong and the distant chiming of the church bells. There was a serene clarity to the day, yet beneath that tranquility lay the deep satisfaction of a mystery laid bare and justice served. The revelations of the past weeks, the hidden letters, the dismantled mantel clock, the concealed resentments, had all culminated in the unmasking of Mr. Collins, the butler whose quiet devotion had masked a restless bitterness. As she prepared her morning tea, Miss Marple reflected on the delicate balance between appearance and reality that so often defined village life. It was a world where the veneer of civility could conceal the most tangled emotions, envy, fear, loyalty, and desperation, and where the smallest detail, if observed with patience and insight, could illuminate the darkest corners. The arrest of Mr. Collins had sent ripples through the village. The butler's demeanor throughout the proceedings had been a mixture of resignation and thinly veiled defiance, his carefully guarded secrets unraveling under the steady gaze of justice. His motives, born of long-simmering grievances and a fractured sense of belonging, spoke to the complex human heart that Miss Marple had long endeavored to understand. In the days that followed, the villagers gathered in cautious but hopeful communion. Rosamond Dalloway, though still carrying the weight of loss, showed a quiet strength, determined to preserve her late husband's legacy and mend the fragile bonds between neighbors. Clara Ackroyd found solace in community support, her earlier fears tempered by the clarity that truth had brought. Miss Marple's visits became a source of comfort to many. Her presence, gentle yet unwavering, reminded the village that understanding and forgiveness were as vital to healing as justice. She listened to stories of sorrow and hope, knitting together the threads of a community eager to move forward. The Mantel clock, once a silent witness to deceit and tragedy, was carefully restored to its place in the Dalloway drawing room. Its ticking now marked not the passage of ominous time, but the steady heartbeat of a village renewed. Miss Marple often found herself drawn to its steady rhythm, a reminder that while time moved inexorably forward, it also offered the chance for renewal and redemption. One afternoon, as she strolled through the village green, Miss Marple encountered Dr. Harcourt and Edith Farnsworth engaged in quiet conversation. The earlier tensions between them had softened, replaced by a tentative understanding born of shared grief and the realization that community required grace as much as judgment. The gardener, Samuel Whitaker, having resolved the circumstances of his abrupt departure, returned quietly to his duties, his presence a symbol of the village's resilience and the restoration of order. Miss Marple knew that beneath the surface of everyday life, the mysteries of human nature would continue to unfold, small dramas of love and jealousy, trust and betrayal. But she welcomed them as the natural cadence of a living community. As evening fell, Miss Marple sat by her window, the soft glow of the hearth illuminating her thoughtful face. The village lights twinkled beyond, casting gentle shadows that danced like memories on the walls. She reflected on the journey from confusion to clarity, the delicate dance of secrets and revelations that had brought the truth to light. In St. Mary Mead, life would continue with its quiet joys and inevitable sorrows, its blend of the ordinary and the extraordinary. But for now, the darkness had receded, and the village stood united, its heart beating strong once more. Miss Marple closed her eyes briefly, a faint smile touching her lips. The past had been faced, the present embraced, and the future awaited, its mysteries unfolding one gentle moment at a time.